has something that is known to be toxic, and the corporation knows it. And they're selling it the word starts to get out that it's a little bit toxic, and the corporation then doubles down on selling more of it while they still can, and also starts blocking all of the knowledge that is trying to come out. And in almost every case, tobacco is another one. The opioid industry is another one. You get the industry itself getting involved in community groups and in scientific groups and putting out false information in a very concerted way. And they have the R&D to know what works and what doesn't in terms of getting people on board. So she was telling me the story of synthetic turf and how she became interested, because she herself is an NIH scientist and has a lot of the same background, lead paint, lead, all kinds of the same story. And when they installed a synturf lawn on her kids' playing field, she was like, what? And it just got crazier and crazier. It was like, tilting windmills with big tobacco. So this got my attention because every single thing you learn about synthetic turf is more toxic and more pernicious than the thing you just learned. And it's mostly the industry trying to create a market for its product. It's an industry with a product working really hard to make the market, which is how it went down with opioids and lead and tobacco and on and on and on it goes. So that's why I'm really interested. This is a sleeper one, and I think it's going to become a much bigger issue, and more people need to know about it because it's really pretty straightforwardly criminal. Yeah.
Thank you, Megan, for bringing it to my attention and bringing our speaker tonight, who has joined us now. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to tell you I have just put on the recording. We often have people ask for the recording who missed the meeting. So with your permission, Kathleen, I'd like to record tonight's session. And if anybody's not comfortable with that, they can turn their camera off, but just stay with us. Welcome, Kathleen. Kathleen has a Ph.D. in neurobiology and in more than 30 years of experience conducting, managing, and reviewing biomedical research related to global public health. And I'm told that you are a dynamo on this issue, and I believe it. So you have a nice audience here tonight that's anxious to hear all that you have to say, and then maybe I can take questions in the chat and field them to you, or if you prefer people just to pop in with their questions, we can do it that way too. Any preferences, Kathleen?
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Megan. I'm game for anything. At this point, I've been at this so long, and I was telling Megan, and she actually told the story fairly well. I mean, it's an issue that chose me. I didn't choose it. And many others. So I assume a lot of you on here, and I really apologize for being late. For some reason, I had it on my schedule for 7 o'clock, and I was like I was working, doing something else for work. So I apologize, but Megan, it sounds like Megan did a really nice, intro, and she's right. A lot of what's going on with synthetic turf is very similar to tobacco, lead. I mean, she has experience with lead. I actually started my career working on extremely low levels of lead and the effects on neurodevelopment. So that caught my attention early on when there was lead found in synthetic turf, the plastic carpets. So at any rate, if you want, I'll go through the presentation I have, and I'm not sure if I have the one that I modified last time when I presented it to Beyond Plastics, but I'll go through it, and I can add. There's so many things wrong with synthetic turf or problematic. It's like a Pandora's box. That the presentation I have actually left out a few things like the heat, and I was going to add that back in, but I didn't have time. So just remember, if you have, it's like, oh, I heard that such and such. I'm happy to fill you in on what I know about that as well. The presentation that I gave to Beyond Plastics was originally created for a stormwater and environmental stormwater conference because of the problems with the microplastic pollution. So that was kind of the main focus, but then there's all the issues on the toxics, on heat, on injury. Heat and injury are the things that in this particular presentation, I don't have as much of, but it's a huge issue. And there's another news item that came out just within the past couple of days. The National Women's Soccer League is being forced to play on synthetic turf in Portland, Oregon, and they're really upset. They don't want to do it, but unfortunately, Portland has a big fan base apparently. But the men are very rarely forced to play on synthetic turf, and this is this in the soccer leagues, and this has been consistent. And so the women have complained both from the international level on down. So just to give you some background, when people say, "Oh, but the players are asking for it," well, it's never the players. It's really the people managing facilities. There's a lot of whining and dining going on of when you decide what kind of material and how you're going to create your facility. And the players are very, very often left out, and the people who don't have a voice are very often children. That's Megan and I were talking. It's like, why doesn't this rise to the level of people's consciousness? Well, because it affects mostly children and athletes, and most of us are not anymore children or athletes, and we don't see it, or when we see it, it looks nice. We're not playing on it. We don't feel the heat. We're not being exposed to the toxics, and the children don't care or don't see that. I mean, they will see the heat, but they don't know any better. So it's part of the problem is because it's affecting a sector of the population that doesn't have a voice, or when it does, is not listened to as much. And when you see the pushback on the women, they're like, well, you should be happy you have fans at all, and they're giving you a nice facility. What are you complaining about? So stop complaining. So anyway, so if it's okay with you, I'll go through my presentation, and then I'll try to feel free. If as I go through, I may answer any questions you have through my presentation. So you may want to wait if there's something really hot, a hot question, I can answer it during. But often I find if you wait, the question will get answered. So I'll try to go through, and then we'll. And as I said, the heat and the injuries, we can talk about some more. I don't necessarily have slides on that right now. I'm gonna need to put together a fuller presentation that has all of that. It's just okay. So I guess I'll share my screen. Megan, is that okay?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So, I have disabled. Do you need to enable?
I just enabled it for you. You should be good now.
Let's see. Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, I did click sharing. Okay, it's showing on my screen. You don't see it? Okay, let me go back, share screen.
Do it one more time. We might have.
Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, yeah,
okay.
I must have, there we go. Now, do you know how to get rid of that black? I have a black control bar at the top. Do you know by any chance how to get rid of that?
I don't think it's an issue. We can see the screen fine.
Okay, I know I gave another presentation. Somebody told me how to do it, and
I think we're good.
Okay, all right. I won't click on the full. Let's see what happens if I do that. Yeah, see, the problem is if I click on the full screen with that black bar at the top, it covers part of my. Okay, so I won't do that.
I don't see a black bar.
You don't see it?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I just see it on my end. Okay, well, that's good to know. But I'll just keep it like this, and I'll figure that out. Okay, so like I was saying, the synthetic turf is a huge problem, and I like to quote the Lorax in this case, because again, it affects mostly children and athletes, people that most adults don't have any direct interaction with synthetic turf, and yet it's a huge. I mean, it's starting to cover all our schools, from the colleges on down to elementary schools. It's playgrounds, and then of course then some professional stadiums, although it's the professionals who are starting, athletes who are starting to push back. And that may be one place where we can, this piece I have here about advocacy, we can get students involved and the professional athletes. I think we've been at this along all the different groups internationally, as well as within the US that have been working on this and not making as much headway as we'd like to. Those are groups that I think we need to get involved in. Megan, so here's, the connection part. So educating people, but you also bringing in new advocacy groups who are actually directly affected, I think is really important. And so, and I have in here, one of the things that we found is really powerful in working on the synthetic turf issue is finding out what is actually out there in your locality, in your county, your municipality, your state. And we're starting to do that in Maryland. And because that's the other issue. I mean, on an individual level, if you're trying to get legislation passed, say to ban synthetic turf, or to focus on the sheer waste problem, the scale of it doesn't hit people. They go, oh well, single-use plastic bags and everything are much more of a problem, which of course they are a huge problem. But I'll go on to see. Okay, yeah, I do have the slide. So although focusing on plastic bags, straws, all the single-use plastics, which is really important, and that's something I'm working on too. Each synthetic turf field has the plastic equivalent of, well over 3 million plastic bags, or well over 46 million plastic straws. So that's a single field, and these fields actually break down. Hold on just a second. My boss just sent me. Hold on one second. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I thought I had another slide here, but so there's this huge amount of plastics within the synthetic turf carpet itself, and a lot of this runs off into streams and creeks and rivers, into air, soil, and water, as we like to say. This gives you a visual of what the synthetic turf is actually consists of. So you have a carpet here of the plastic blades. There's an infill, and it goes, so a lot of people have the misconception that the rubber granules that, again, because most people never go on these fields, except unless you're, a child or an athlete, they think that the rubber is underneath. So it's like, how would it interact with the environment? Well, actually the rubber granules, which is mostly what the infill is, it's pulverized tires. There's other things, as I'll point out, but it's actually poured on top of this carpet. So this is a carpet with plastic blades. It's poured on top and it filters down between the blades, but that it ends up, the blades end up wearing off, and they wear off again as plastic debris and microplastics into air, soil, and water. And these pellets of tire rubber with all the toxins and everything else they contained, heavy metals, run off again into air, soil, and water. And then below that, it's kind of like a parking lot base, a gravel base, compacted soil. So when you take away a vegetated sports field, you basically put in a parking lot like base, and you put this plastic carpet on top of it. And we like an easy to remember metric. An average field is about 80 sports fields, about 80,000 square feet. And about 40,000 pounds of plastic backing and blades in this carpet is plastic, or that's the plastic carpet. And then in order of magnitude more than that, for about 400,000 pounds of infill is used. And that's usually tire waste, and often combined with silica sand or other infill material. But primarily it is tire waste. I think probably more than 95% in the United States and most of the world, because it's cheap and free. So I'm not going to go too much into this, just that these MS4 permits are, it's one of the things that we're trying to use to get attention, because you can't, the Clean Water Act, under the Clean Water Act, the permits the municipalities have to put together don't allow point sources of pollution. And synthetic turf fields, and this is one of the key points, synthetic turf fields are a huge point source of plastic pollution. And by plastic, I mean not just the plastic carpeting that wears down, but also the infill. So why you all probably know why we're concerned with microplastics. There's 3 main sources of microplastics, and they're very small, but pertinent to synthetic turf. So there's wear and tear microplastics. So if there's an item that when it's exposed to the environment, wears down and releases microplastics into the environment. So that would be this outdoor carpeting, essentially, it's what synthetic turf is, wears down over time, and the and it releases microplastics, sheds microplastics into air, soil, and water. And tires do the same thing, that, when they wear down on the road. And of course, they're related, since pulverized tires are then, the equivalent of 30 to 40,000 pulverized tires are used for a single synthetic turf field. Intentional microplastics, a lot of people know about this as the microbeads added to cosmetics. Well, synthetic turf fields, the pulverized tires that are poured on top of it are another example of intentional microplastics. And as I'll mention later, the European Union actually is proposing and close to regulating synthetic turf infills as intentional microplastics and banning them. Of course, the industry is pushing back, so we'll see what actually ends up happening with that at the end of the day. But the US isn't addressing this at all. So, and then the third category of microplastics is the sheer waste. So, and again, synthetic turf fits into this category. So at the end of life, it's been shedding microplastics, and at the end of its life, it's disposed of, and it breaks down over time. So synthetic turf is dumped for every 8 to 10 years. The whole plastic carpeting with the infill, it's not recycled. And the industry has now admitted there's, at the end of this, and I think Megan shared with you, there's some videos where the industry essentially admits that all of the lies they've been telling them, to say, yeah, it's true, we can't really recycle this stuff. And it's being stockpiled, or it's being dumped where it doesn't belong, or being sent to landfills, very rarely incinerated, just because of what it is. It can't be. Not that that's a good thing. We don't want it to be incinerated. And this is just an example of, this is a report. This was from a report done in Europe on microplastic. And remember, I mentioned to you the one category of microplastic sources, the wear and tear category. So in that wear and tear category, which people don't pay as much attention to usually, they actually have artificial turf. And again, it's a point source of pollution. A big, huge category is automotive tires. And you may have heard about recently the 6 ppd quinone toxins that are now known to be killing almost all the coho salmon in the Northwest. And these are from the wear and tear microplastics from automotive tires. Then, of course, they're putting this stuff, 30 to 40,000 tires worth of it onto artificial turf. And that's becoming a point source, which we'll later mention is kind of like a Trojan horse, introducing it to places where it wouldn't normally be, not adjacent to a roadway, for example. Okay, so synthetic turf microplastic sources. This is actually one of the first fields that I advocated against when I started working on this. It's Walter Johnson High School in Bethesda, Maryland. And this, by 5 or 6 years, this was already shedding. So I showed you the idealized picture of what a synthetic turf carpet should look like. Well, this green stuff here is all the disintegrating carpet. And this black stuff is the tire granules that are showing, and you can see, and you could just scoop this stuff up. So that begs the question, where is all of this plastic going? Well, it goes down into the stormwater drains. And in Montgomery County, where I live, they have stormwater facilities, but the stormwater facilities are not designed to deal with this, nor to deal with the toxins that leach off of the plastic or the pellets. And this is old rolls of synthetic turf, and you can see the tire crumb that's just coming out of it. So what are some of the infills? The most common, again, is the tire crumb. And another one is called Nike grind. Supposedly, they tout it as being ecological because it uses basically manufacturing waste, including from shoes, the soles of shoes and stuff like that, that didn't actually end up in commerce. Not environmental, not any better. And actually, in some ways, well, it's a different kind of worse, because this kind of waste often floats to the surface. The tire from ends up in the sediment, and the blades, which you can see some here, actually end up on the top. And I have like a snow globe, like when I go places, I show where the blades are floating to the top of the water, and where turtles and fish, you might well think that it's something that they can eat. And then this here is the oxymoron of envirofill. So they take sand, which silica sand has some issues in case somebody breathes in the silica, but sand is at least a natural product. Well, they take it and they coat it with plastic. And I mean, that to me is like, and then they call it envirofill. So that right there kind of gives you an idea of how this industry works, and the kind of PR. And so where does this stuff go? It drains. So here's a example. This is a synthetic turf field in Washington, D.C. You can see the plastic field. You can see the tire crumb here washing off. Here's a puddle. And here it's going down a drain, and the drain says, do not pollute, drains to waterways, right there. And that's where it's going. And here is one of the, often for most of these fields, they have perimeter drains that go to a main drain. And here's all the tire crumb going into a perimeter drain. Now, the industry itself knows this problem. And so this is an industry slide. This is from an industry presentation. And they say that 1 to 5 tons of microplastic per field per year sheds. And they even ask, where does it go? Hold on just a second. Okay. And so they actually, because 1 to 5 tons of the infill and the leaves the field per year, they add 1 to 5 tons more to the field every year. So it's leaving, it's going into air, soil, and water, and they're adding more. And they say it washes away with the rainwater, it clings to socks and shoes. And they note that the degradation of the plastic and the infill gets washed down internal drains when the athletes shower. So there's, of course, no facilities there to capture that at all. And then just exits the field during maintenance with the equipment that they use. So that's both the fibers that are breaking down and the granules. So in the United States, there's estimated, we don't know for sure, the industry kind of stopped. I mean, several years ago, they said there were 15,000 fields, and they keep saying there's 15,000 fields. And I think with all the attention to synthetic turf, they're afraid to tell us how many there actually are out there. But so right now, there's probably 15 to 20,000, maybe more in the United States. That's approximately 72 million square feet of plastic carpeting covering formerly vegetated ground. For the most part, it's always formerly vegetated ground. Very rarely does it, they do on top of what was concrete or asphalt. And mostly it uses tire crumb for infill. And I think this was an industry number in 2018. The synthetic field material in the US was estimated to be 4,760 billion or million, 40 billion. Anyway, a lot of waste. And in Europe, whoops, let's get back. Europe actually is ahead of the US in dealing with or trying or realizing the problems, partly because they are a lot smaller, the places that are installing it. And so the waste is more apparent. And they have in Europe over 50,000 synthetic turf fields installed. And right now over 336 million square feet. And again, one of the double whammies of synthetic turf that's different from any other material, really, any other plastic material, is that it also displaces grass and soil, which would otherwise filter pollutants and oxygenate the air. And again, like I mentioned, it heats up to high levels, so it contributes to the heat island effects, and it's actually hotter than asphalt. So I'll just kind of, I won't go through this too much. I already mentioned how much of the plastic is installed, and that it's the three concentrated source of microplastic pollution on the three categories: the wear, intentionally added, and disintegrating solid waste. Okay, and this is another really good point. If you are talking to someone who deals with stormwater issues, synthetic turf is not sediment. It's a manufactured waste and should be treated as such in stormwater permit enforcement. And that's a really important point. And it's not, right now, it's often ignored. It looks like, and again, this is a perception issue, it looks like soil, right? It looks like, but it's not, it's this huge amount of waste. If somebody dumped what you see here on a parking lot and it washed down a storm drain, it would immediately raise enforcement issues. But the fact that it's washing off a field, they're kind of blind to it and they treat it like sediment. So there's a lot of room for improving legislation and enforcement to apply to synthetic turf fields. And the other really important point, and I mentioned earlier, is synthetic turf is like a microplastic Trojan horse. And I mentioned, the issues with the tire crumb. There's all the toxic chemicals released. Well, when you install a synthetic turf field, often they're in relatively rural areas, stream valleys, parks, schools. They often install it somewhere that floods a lot, and they say that's why they install it, because the grass has a problem growing. But in fact, that's the worst place to install it. Sorry, my alarm just got off. So anyway, so this whole idea of synthetic turf as a microplastic Trojan horse, and again, once it ends up in these places, you can never get rid of it. It get rid of what breaks down. I mean, hopefully, can get rid of the synthetic turf if we advocate enough. But what's gone down the drain stays down the drain. There's no, and I mentioned earlier, there's no evidence that stormwater management devices effectively capture migrating rubber and plastic particles and fibers and related pollutants. Also, where you have a stormwater facility and they do clean it out, what they're usually cleaning out, they think, is basically sediment. Well, if you mix plastic and tire crumb in with that sediment, where are they putting that? Do they put it into a landfill? Are they composting it and putting it back into the environment? So that spreads all of this pollution out into the environment in ways that were never anticipated before and are not being addressed. So, just to remind you that there's all sorts of chemicals in both the plastics and the plastic carpets, both inherent to plastic itself and added as antioxidants, as color stabilizers, just all sorts of toxic chemicals. One of them is the perfluorinated chemicals, the PFAS chemicals, that family of chemicals that many of you have heard of. In all, many carpeting, plastic carpeting in particular, they have to extrude all these fibers, and I have pictures from the internet where they show these machines, the fibers being extruded, and they're really hot to begin with. Well, how do they keep those hot fibers that they're extruding from sticking to the machinery? They add these PFAS chemicals. And Dalton, Georgia, which is where a lot of carpeting is produced, including the most synthetic turf carpeting in the United States, is a huge point source that those mills of PFAS pollution for all the downstream towns and cities. And so a lot of it probably comes from the synthetic turf as well as the other carpeting production. So some of the, in the plastics, so the undisclosed toxins, there are phthalates, as I mentioned, antioxidants, plasticizers, heavy metals such as lead and cadmium, and the PFAS chemicals. And then the tire crumb contains, a witch's brew, like Pandora's box of toxins. I mean, the carbon black itself, which is about 30% of a tire, neurotoxins such as the heavy metals, especially lead, which may be introduced in the manufacture, but is often picked up as from the lead weights actually that are used to balance tires, and often fall off on roads, and are often ground up with the rest of the tire when they grind it up for the tire crumb that's used on fields and playgrounds. Then there's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are part of the oils, the oils that are used in tires. They're usually petroleum oils, and hormone disrupting phthalates, again, and many volatile organic compounds such as benzene. And then aquatic toxins, zinc is another heavy metal that's extremely toxic to aquatic organisms. And California in particular is starting to really look closely at zinc, and Europe already has regulations regarding zinc from synthetic turf, but the US does not, and from tire crumb. Whoops, last on that page. And then the recently identified 6-PPD quinone that I mentioned, that is used, it's an antioxidant used in tires to keep it from cracking, and it's in all tires and extremely toxic to salmon. Essentially, it kills all the migrating coho salmon in the Northwest. And we have a number of people doing research on what's been known and not publicized, till now about 6-PPD. And we're finding that there's a lot of kind of hidden literature on effects of 6-PPD on other aquatic organisms, and also on mammals such as rats. Okay, so hold on. Yeah, okay, I did that. There's some evolving synthetic turf and microplastics regulation. Within the United States, most of the regulation has been banning the use of the tire crumb. So not regulating the synthetic turf itself, but regulating the infills. And Montgomery County, where I live, partly because of advocacy, our county council at least banned the use of tire crumb in synthetic turf, in new synthetic turf. Of course, we have a lot of the old fields that are still washing the tire crumb down into the air, soil, and water, and it's still used as part of playgrounds, which is something that we've also been trying to get them to stop, but have not gotten them to do yet. The European Chemicals Agency, Europe in general, is way ahead of us, and they do propose to limit the use of intentionally added microplastics, particularly the tire crumb, and including in artificial turf fields. And again, the Europeans have said that artificial turf pitches, they call it the fields, as we call them fields, shed between 20,000 and 70,000 tons of microplastics per year. And in this case, they're talking about particularly about the infill, but then you add onto that the 5 to 10% of the plastic per field that's being shed each year. Okay. And so then this is, I just have a few slides here that were about the permits and the duty of municipalities to eliminate these point sources, and most municipalities are not addressing a synthetic turf as a point source, but they should be eliminating. So these facilities are usually intended to capture background pollutants. They're not intended to capture illicit discharges, nor do they do it very well. Okay, so I won't go too much more in here. So what is the solution? To choose natural grass, and you'll hear all the arguments, so grass can't take it, blah, 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 but that's not true. High quality fields can be achieved with natural grass without the use, even without the use of synthetic pesticides or fertilizers, in fact, better, but with really good cultural practices. And there's a lot of literature on that. Unfortunately, the grass profession, the field installer, field manager profession, it's a profession, it's not an industry. They don't have the deep pockets nor the access to high-priced scientific mercenaries that the petrochemical and synthetic turf industry do. So they're having a hard time of getting their message across. All the dumping of the synthetic turf, all the things that I've talked to you about, this is just the tip of the turf bird, unfortunately. And we need as many people as possible starting to focus on this issue. Again, I didn't mention, or I don't have slides, but focusing on the heat, these fields can get up to 150, 160, 170, even 180 degrees. I've measured, and if you get, it's easy to get an infrared heat thermometer that you aim at a surface, and it gives you the temperature. And again, injuries, often one of the arguments given will be, oh, it prevents injuries. Well, actually, the legitimate, and you can ask me what's legitimate versus not. Scientific literature on injuries shows that athletes actually get injured at higher rates, particularly knee and anything that turns. So if you plant your foot on a synthetic turf field, on a grass field, the grass would give, the soil, but on a synthetic turf field, it stays there and your knee and ankle give. And it also gets really hard because basically it's just a carpet on top of rocks. So it gets hazardously hard in very little time. Here's some resources, and I know Megan gave you some more. So that's it for right now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. We've had quite a few questions in the chat, and we can get to those. I also wanted to make note that one of your resources was synturf.org, and I actually went to that because I wanted to learn more just about the carbon footprint, since our meetup really is very much climate-based. And I wanted to just share with you some facts that I found interesting as it relates to climate change. The artificial turf and other synthetic surfaces increase the carbon footprint and therefore contribute in their own way to a greater global warming. Often the artificial turf replaces natural grass surface, which you mentioned. So one contribution by turf to global warming is the removal of natural grass surface that reduces carbon dioxide by converting it into oxygen. The production process for artificial turf is for the most part fueled by fossil fuels, as is its installation, after-sale maintenance, and eventual disposal protocols. The increased use of artificial turf fields by sports leagues promotes greater concentration of vehicles at a site and therefore contributes to elevated presence of harmful gases in the area of the venue. The manufacturing, installation, service, and disposal of a 2-acre artificial turf field facility is responsible for the generation of a total of 55.6 tons of carbon dioxide in addition to other greenhouse gases and pollutants. So the following items debunk the pernicious myth and misleading claims by the turf industry that artificial turf playing fields are a, quote, green alternative. So, clearly this is a climate-related issue. We have a number of questions. Kathleen, are you able to see the questions that are in the chat and take them
let me
in
see
an
if I
order?
can, hold
That
on, I
makes-
can't see them yet. Let me see if I can,
Okay.
do you want me to keep my presentation up or stop sharing?
It's okay if you keep sharing. I can just read some of them to you.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and read them, because right now on my screen, I can't see the chat. and I'm
Yes,
not sure how to see.
absolutely. I have no
Okay.
problem answering. Starting with the questions. So for the first one, it was early on. What about Brockville? What is Brockville? Wendy Penner asked the question.
I think Rockville is the, is that the Nike grind? They're all, most of them are versions of a synthetic, and I forget what Brockville is.
It's some kind of wood, actually. So yeah, the proposed field in my community is going to use Brockville and not the crumb rubber. So this was really helpful to hear you like separate out that the plastic grass itself has all these impacts and
Right,
not
so-
crumb rubber. But I just wondered if you might know anything about Brockville, but that's okay if you don't.
Yeah, so it's a newer, that's now that you say that yes, some places are using that, they're using basically ground up wood or cork and coconut. So that's what when Montgomery County put in its ban on tire crumb, they specified that the alternative infill, they didn't ban synthetic turf fields, but they specified the alternative infill had to be a plant, quote unquote, plant-based infill, which would mean it could be wood, it could be the cork coconut. Unfortunately, that doesn't get rid of plastic carpeting and the huge waste and the microplastic pollution from that. I mean, it's slightly better because you get rid of the tire crumb, which is a good thing, but it also makes people think that solves all the problems. And of course it doesn't. It doesn't solve the heat. The plastic carpeting itself it's not just the tires. The tires heat up too, the tire crumb, but the plastic heats up to these levels. So I actually, when they first installed the synthetic turf field at my son's high school, I went out there and I took temperatures of the synthetic turf before it had when it was installed, but without the tire crumb hadn't been dumped on top of it, and then after, and also there were rolls alongside, so I was able to, even after they dumped it on, I was able to look at the temperature, and essentially it was very similar. So the carpeting itself heats up, so using any alternative infill helps very little. And actually there's research from Penn State University, and at their Sports Surface Research Center, and they actually are funded by Field Turf, which is one of the major synthetic turf installers. So a lot of their research has actually never been published. A lot of the research that's not good for the industry, it's on their website, but they've never been able to get published, presumably because
Kathleen, what website is that? I'm sorry.
it's a Penn State University. It's their Sports Surface Research Center, so SSRC.
Thank you.
Penn State University, and they have a lot. So they've done really good research on heat, and there's some really good quotes, basically saying, the little bit of heat mitigation that's done if you use an alternative infill, such as the cork coconut, is so minuscule, it really doesn't make a difference. And I would think the Brockville, because I do know that even wood mulch by itself is hotter than grass, and then synthetic turf plastic is hotter than wood mulch. So if you just use wood, I think that probably it's not going to help with the heat component. You won't have the toxins from the tires, but and also in what we found with the alternative infills is that the athletes often get scuffed up or get abraded even more. So there's been a lot of pushback from the athletes themselves, they didn't like the tire crumb fields, but they liked the alternative infills even less.
We actually have a related question to that from Joel. He says, having to play high school soccer on turf field a few times, from experience, every time you hit the ground, you end up picking the fill out of your skin wherever you touch the turf. This probably happened over a dozen times to me. How concerned should I be? Is that something that has been looked into? Would you like to say more about that?
Yeah, so especially with the tire crumb, so one of the issues that they are concerned about, and that the federal government started to do research on before the Trump administration, it actually started under the Obama administration, was the dermal exposure, and of course, if you're a soccer goalie or a keeper, you're constantly diving into the synthetic turf, and so there is real concern. There's been a cluster of athletes, particularly soccer players, that's been identified by a coach at the University of Washington over time. And what she found is that her growing list is really heavily weighted towards soccer goalies, presumably because they're kind of being like the human lab rats. They're the most exposed. So if you were to expose a lab rat, more, and other people less, say that athletes are playing on grass or athletes who play very seldom, or even on the same field, they're not playing positions where they have to dive into the stuff. They are coming down with cancers at a much higher rate. So I think particularly for soccer goalies, I would definitely be concerned. And anyone who plays a lot on these fields, I would be concerned. You might want to protect yourself with more clothing that it can't get into, and goggles and what else.
It sounds like also there are increased staph infections when people get
Right.
abrasions. So there's also biologic issues that
Right.
can occur too. I want to jump to another question here. Abigail Stone said that actually on the Meetup website, we mentioned that stockpiles can be seen from Google Earth. Where are they visible? Where might she find that?
So one of our advocates, Amanda Farber, has been doing a lot of this, and then some other people have started doing it as well. And I've never actually, gone in and tried to do it. I mean, people will actually look at Google Earth and they have an idea of where they may be stockpiled, and you can actually see them once you look at an area. So for example, she was looking, we have an agricultural preserve in Montgomery County. And so she was kind of looking through, and then there's a very distinctive, they look like Tootsie, not Tootsie Rolls. There's an old type of candy, it's, rolls of it, but there's all these stacked rolls. And they have a very distinctive pattern when you look at them from Google Earth. Of course, it is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack, because you finally have to zoom, you have to know where to zoom in. But if you zoom in on commercial facilities, landscaping areas, anywhere with lots of parking lots, often you'll start to find them, because they will basically take, supposedly for future recycling, which doesn't exist. And so they keep piling up. And so, I should ask Amanda, and actually one of the things that the Maryland Sierra Club is doing is exactly that in all of the counties in Maryland. Somebody from each of the groups has taken on the task of trying to inventory all the synthetic turf fields that are in their county. And so a number of other people have done that, done the Google Earth, in addition to trying to get, on the ground, asking the school systems, asking the parks, asking private like independent school associations, who has synthetic turf, but then they're also trying to validate from the air and seeing if they can find these. So I can ask a little bit more about how they go about it, how they go narrowing down the areas that they find, but they are finding them.
Yeah, and the focus of our meetups, we try to be solution based. So I would like to not end this meetup without just talking about, okay, what are actions that we can take? It sounds like one of them would be to do in inventory in your local area, both of where these fields are and where there might be any non-recycled turf sitting. What are some other steps that we can take as individuals to deal with this issue?
So definitely find out. So definitely try to find out, what is in your area, what's being installed, what are they using? And it sounds like you're already, some of you are already facing, a field that they're planning to install. Educate yourselves. You're already reaching out, and thank you for listening to me today. Get all your resources together. There's there's municipalities all over the country that have gone through these type of hearings, have all sorts of resources, and we can help you. On Facebook, there's a great Facebook page, the Safe Healthy Playing Fields Facebook page. Go to there. There's a wealth of information.
Say that one again, please.
Safe Healthy Playing Fields. And that's one of the resources here and that I've given before is the Safe Healthy Playing Fields website. And unfortunately, because it's a nonprofit that doesn't have paid staff, the website isn't kept up as much as we would like to, but the Facebook page is kept up a lot more. So you can get a lot of information, people, places where they're also fighting this. And if you email the Safe Healthy Playing Fields contact, if you go on that website, you'll get a response from a volunteer, and we'll try to hook you up with other people who have are working on some of the same issues. But as far as other things that you can do, it sounds like you all are advocating against new fields synthetic turf fields going in. And that is one thing to do. We also have resources on better grass fields. And I think that's the positives. Don't only focus just on the negative as synthetic turf fields are bad, which they are, and that should be enough. But unfortunately, in the real world, you're fighting against a good PR machine who's demonizing grass essentially. So we do have resources about and videos and just some information on better grass. And there's the the Fields Foundation in Massachusetts. There's a foundation that was put together specifically to start doing this in Massachusetts. And one of the things that we, meaning the network of us, would like to do is put together, particularly with Zoom. Now Zoom has made this available, is put together a how to do grass fields better type of Zoom presentation and pulling in the experts. So if anyone would like to help work on that or knows grass field experts, because we're always trying to pull in ones who know how to do fields better. For example, there's one of our go-to experts is a professional named Jared Minnick, and he's a long time field installer. Well, he actually doesn't do the installation himself, he manages them. And his big focus has been grass fields that are durable, that can take a huge amount of use and abuse in commercial and budget settings, and at the least amount of money. And unfortunately, there's not enough of people like him. But there are some, and so we can pull in people like that as consultants when you're working on your own projects, or when your municipality or town or parks are proposing to put in plastic.
Can you say again the name of that Fields Foundation? What is it called exactly?
Yeah, it's I think it is just the Field Foundation. I can send afterwards. It's and I'll try to make sure I get you the exact contacts.
Okay. And can you just talk more about industry reps showing up at public hearings and meetings?
Oh.
Eileen Ryan brought that question up.
Yeah. So it was mentioned earlier that the playbook that this industry is using, it's very similar to what other industries have used. And what we found, and the part of this playbook is always to they hire a trusted a scientist who seems trustworthy to come and tell you this is all fine and don't worry about it, and then they often pair them with somebody who seems like a local parent or a trusted athletic expert, and they have the deep pockets apparently to do this, to find out where synthetic turf is being discussed at the most local of local levels. So for example, I mean, we've experienced this over the years at the legislative level, at the state and as well as local, where, you know, they'll have one of these hired, you know, scientists for hire, you know, say, oh, it's all fine, don't worry about lead, it's not there. You know, if I allow my child to play on it, it's fine. And, you know, then they'll have, you know, parents testify. But we had, so recently we had a very small, it was a civic association. There were like 14 people. It was a small civic association. And on the agenda, it didn't even say what they were going to talk. It was just on the agenda was synthetic turf. And so so I get on this call and they had asked me to come on. I wasn't actually part of this association, but I was asked to come in and, you know, talk about synthetic turf with one of the other members. And somebody from Illinois gets on the call saying, oh, we've got all this new synthetic turf products that, you know, make it safer. And so don't worry. And we're like, how did you even find out about this little meeting? And then somebody else gets on who is more local, but had never been involved with civic association, was a parent, and was like, oh yeah, my children, you know, I don't want them playing on rocky. So they always talk about rocky, muddy grass fields and how synthetic turf is there. So it was this tag teaming, but I had never seen it at quite this local level. And I think as wonderful as Zoom is, I think one of the things it's allowed the industry to do is to delve even deeper. I mean, they have the deep pockets to set people out there looking at, you know, just do a synthetic turf or artificial turf, you know, dive and, you know, whatever comes up on the internet, you know, set somebody there. So anyway, it just shows you what the reach of this industry is and how they operate.
Thank you. We've had a number of people adding links to things in the chat, which is very helpful. Wendy Penner put in a link to the satellite photo there of plastic turf. She also put in a link to Planet Science. I have found that when I'm on Zooms, it's helpful sometimes just to click on the links that are in the chat. So then you'll have a tab open with that link later to take a closer look. Donna Stanton asked, in your slide with the photo of a vehicle spraying something or spreading something on the field, were they adding microplastics?
So that one, I believe was, they were adding an alternative infill called clintophile zeolite, which actually to a synthetic turf field. And that was one of these alternative infills. It's actually a volcanic glass-like mineral, and it turns out it's horrible. I mean, there's a version of zeolite that's actually potentially as carcinogenic as asbestos, and they've done this. They did it at our soccerplex in Montgomery County, and within a year, they had quietly gotten rid, you know, tried vacuumed as much of it out as they could and put in that Nike lunge. Which is, it was any better, but the athletes hate it. Apparently it is like as abrasive as glass. It's very powdery and it comes up and I mean, it's horrible. We testified against it. We had scientists, the National Center for Health Research, they weighed in, you know, just and to no avail. I mean, it's not a plant-based infill, which is what the infills were supposed to be in our schools. It's a mineral and it's an untested mineral, and all we know about it is that, you know, in some forms it's carcinogenic, but you would think even if this clintophile form isn't specifically carcinogenic, you don't want to be breathing in a glass-like powdery substance. So that's what that was. I didn't mention it specifically as to, but that when they tell you they're using an alternative infill, don't assume that it may cause more problems than it solves.
Good question then. Leo has his hand up. He'd like to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Could you tell me what companies make Synturf?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of them. So Shaw Industries, which is one of the major carpet manufacturers in general, they make synthetic turf. There's a whole list of them, and I can send you, and there's always new ones, and there's some, field turf is one of the big ones.
That-
What's that?
What was that company?
Field turf.
Field Turf.
Field turf. Yeah, do you know which, for the local one that you all are dealing with, what, do you know what the supplier or the manufacturer is?
When you say local, are you talking about in Massachusetts or where?
Yeah, or I wasn't sure with this group whether there was a specific.
our- I'm as the organizer, we're in New Paltz, but we get a lot of different people joining these meetups. And it sounds like the
Okay.
largest group that's dealing with one right now is in Massachusetts, I want to say.
Yeah, there's Massachusetts is a hotbed, has been a hotbed for a long time of fights against synthetic turf. Unfortunately, not successful, sometimes successful, but yeah, I thought you all were mostly from New Paltz, but yeah, so it's important. It's helpful to know who the manufacturer is, and what the source. I mean, essentially they're all the same. They're a huge plastic shag carpet.
So
And-
is there one or a few major manufacturers, or is there a lot of it?
There's a lot of little ones. There's a lot of ones out of China, because it's not just the sports industry that uses it. It's also a lot of residential. Unfortunately, in California, they do it big time because it's what saves water. Of course, it also shrink wraps the soil that's already drought stricken, and is extremely hot. So adding to the heat, and if there's fires, of course it burns up like crazy. So there are a number of manufacturers. There's big ones, the small ones like Shaw and Field Turf and Sprint Turf, and there's a number of the big AstroTurf. Well, I didn't even mention AstroTurf. Of course, everybody knows AstroTurf. I mean, that's they're the first. And that
company or
well, it goes back to DuPont and the big villains, DuPont, 3M, those companies. It goes back to that, and so AstroTurf was actually started back. I think DuPont was started AstroTurf, and then some of these other companies came up afterwards. I think Field Turf, AstroTurf, and Field Turf, and then it's diversified into a lot of other companies that try to do it as cheap as possible. I mean, the main differences are how the blades are, just what's in the blades, how they're oriented, how dense it is. So, you can get really cheap ones for your landscape, ones that have a shorter pile, taller pile. But yeah, so there's a number of manufacturers, but there are a few of the big ones.
Carrie
Like
Green
filter
has
tester.
been patiently waiting to ask a question for a while. So Carrie, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. Thank you. So I actually have a number of questions, but I'm going to start with the one about playability. So the group that has been advocating for synthetic turf in Western Massachusetts, one of their main arguments is that we cannot sustain playable fields. And I know that you're saying that you have good resources. We've had a lot of challenges, and honestly, our kids play on synthetic turf, whether we have it or not. We end up having to bus them to other fields to play tournaments because our fields aren't usable. So the argument is that if we had a usable field, we wouldn't have to keep transporting our kids to other places. The Massachusetts Building Association gives LEED certification, LEED silver, I think, points toward LEED certification for using artificial turf. And maybe you're going to say that that's industry driven,
Yep.
right? But the savings on water is what they point to, right?
But it doesn't save on water because it gets so hot, they have to cool it down, or the kids can't play on it.
Right. And so I mean, we're fairly educated on a lot of these issues at this point because we've been looking at this for a few years. But one of the things that we've looked at and haven't talked a lot about publicly is this concept of engineered grass, right? So everything that you would install in terms of drainage, and well, I guess it would actually have, you would need a water access point, but the undergrid essentially for an artificial turf field without the artificial turf. That would be the only way, or the primary way, I should say, to really support and sustain a natural grass field. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, have you ever seen
Are you talking
engineered
about
grass fields?
Are you talking about hybrid fields that have a plastic, like grid?
There's no plastic.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's no plastic that's in contact with the players. All
Yeah,
right.
you don't want,
Essentially,
right.
go ahead.
So I know, I know there's these hybrid where they do use some kind of a plastic thing. I mean, the problem with that is then when you want to actually re-engineer the field, which you're going to have to at some point, you have to deal with this plastic and how to take that up, and the grid or the netting or whatever they're rooting the grass into. Really what it comes down to engineering the grass fields correctly for your for your climate, for your soil types. I mean, they may have to engineer the soil itself, maybe it has to be more sand-based or natural soil-based. But at the end of the day, what in talking to all of the experts, what it really comes down to is doing the right thing initially. Most of the fields that they complain about that, oh, they can't take it, were never engineered correctly to begin with. I mean, we have a local elementary school where they decided to put in synthetic turf, but when you went and looked at it, it was literally, they had used it as the staging area for the geothermal installation when they put it in, and they were big pieces of concrete and rocks. They never bothered to actually screen the soil, put in good soil for a grass field, which would have been a minuscule amount of money compared to a synthetic turf field, which only lasts. So the other thing, remember, is the synthetic turf fields only last at most 8 years safely. The Walter Johnson field I showed you, it was shedding like that at 5 to 6 years. And all of the fields that we've had experience with now, they are hazardously hard at 5 to 6 years, and they keep dumping tire crumb and infill on top of them to try to make them last longer. So it's not, so money wise and playability wise, synthetic turf can't hold a candle, can't even compare to a well-engineered grass field. And a well-engineered grass field is going to be a lot cheaper, and it's going to be sustainable over the long term. You don't have to do the replacing like you do with plastic. So it's really a red herring because they're comparing a poorly engineered grass field to synthetic turf. And that's what they're telling you. And that's what they're trained. So this is the other thing. And I've read some documents. They actually, the industry, when there's a municipality or a school system that decides they want to go with synthetic turf, okay, we'll make sure that you don't take care of your grass fields, and here's what to do. So people will get fed up with the grass fields and say they need synthetic turf.
So can you point to some well-engineered campuses in Massachusetts or New England that we could look at to see what they're doing and how they're being successful, not just with a field, but with a campus?
Yeah, there's one, I'll have to, on the Safe Healthy Playing Fields website, there's a brochure where we haven't pulled it out as its own thing, but there's several places where they have really focused on engineering of the grass fields, including the soccerplex that I mentioned, where they have a couple of synthetic turf fields, and they put this zeolite infill and then got rid of it. And they were originally going to put in more synthetic turf fields, and they haven't, because they've been improving their grass fields to the point where, so it's a number to keep in your head, is 1,000 hours of use. Their fields can take well over 1,000 hours of use, and they can use them right after the rain because they engineer them correctly. And one of the things to remember is to ask, when they say, oh, our fields can't take it, do they ever do something as simple as aeration? I mean, aeration is simple. It needs to be done periodically. The equipment is not expensive. Once you have it, you can use it for a lot of different fields. and just simple aeration done correctly, done at the right times, and you don't need to close the field after that. In fact, after you do aeration and they may throw down some seed, it's actually better to have the field used, because then it helps to apparently get the field, the pieces of sod that were pulled up in the aeration back into use again by the microbes in the field. So simple cultural practices that are typically not done or not done when they should be are a really important component. So engineering the field correctly to begin with, using the right grass, paying attention to the soil, the composition of the soil, making sure it's screened, that you don't leave a compacted rock-ridden surface for the grass to grow on initially. And then to use things like aeration. I mean, aeration is probably the single most important component of grass fields.
Kathleen,
Successful grass fields. And I can send you some of the some links to. I mean, this is like the holy grail. And unfortunately, like I mentioned, there's a lot of money, and of course in Maryland too, in a lot of places, there's a lot of money being pumped into at the state levels and local levels into synthetic turf, but not into natural turf, even though it's a lot less expensive to put in to install a really well-engineered grass field. There's no money for it. And yet for the plastic fields, there is. And so one of the things we've been trying to do in Maryland is get them to stop, under our program, Open Space program, to stop getting them to fund plastic fields with program open space funds. I mean, it seems like totally, oxymoronic to call a plastic field part of open space. But, we finally pull back and say, okay, let's see if we can get them to fund grass fields. The part of the problem is they consider synthetic turf a capital improvement because it's plastic, I guess. I don't know. And they don't consider grass to be. So it's like, So
Kathleen,
the thumb on the scale is huge in favor of synthetic turf.
I think you've whet our appetite to just want to learn more. And so in the interest of time, we're going to have to close soon. But I want to know, how can people get a hold of you? Is there an email that you can share? Or
Sure.
If you can pop that in the chat maybe, or I can put it in for you.
Yeah, so Megan has all my contact information, but
Okay.
I can put in, so probably that's the best.
Okay. And I would actually like to thank Megan and call upon her I think she had a follow-up question, but just thank Megan for connecting us with you, Kathleen. Yes, indeed.
Thank you all for listening.
No
Go ahead,
worries.
Megan.
I just had kind of a comment for the few of us who are actually in New Paltz here. The question came up of, well, do we have this in New Paltz? This doesn't sound like a New Paltz thing. And, I'm somewhat new to New Paltz, but I'm also like, yeah, New Paltz. I didn't think we did. So I reached out to our environmental connection on the SUNY New Paltz campus, who's beloved within this group. And not only do we have them, but they're really not on her radar either. The answer that she sent was, oh yeah, we have two. There's an older one and a newer one. One has a track that tons of folks walk on. And the other one, I think, is a soccer field behind Esopus Hall. And I did my darndest to try and integrate sustainability into the newer one, which is a remarkably positive pitch on a remarkably negative field, which I found very telling.
Right. And so yeah, this gets to one of the points I was making. People just aren't aware of them because, you all aren't playing on, the new ball, it's the people who are playing on them are not the people who have any power and are, raising concerns. And so, but one of the other things was asked, what can you do? Find out where these fields are going, and then ask where they're going to go when they're disposed of, and when they have to resurface them. And then follow up, because they'll hand wave. They'll say, oh, they're going to go away to be recycled. And they often say be recycled. They will not be recycled. There is nowhere in the United States that recycling is possible. And there's one place in the world that's even trying to recycle the carpeting and the infill, and that's in Denmark. And they keep saying that company in Denmark is going to put one in the United States, but they've been saying that for like 10 years now. and it's not happening, and it probably will never happen. They also say they'll do it in Malaysia, but we've already been run through that with the field that you saw earlier that was like breaking down. And Malaysia is not recycling it. They'll send it there, but it's being trashed in Malaysia, just like all the other plastic that's being sent to Malaysia is just building up. And the United States should be part of the convention that of industrialized nations that said they will not send their trash to Indonesia and Malaysia. But the United States, of course, has not signed on to that. And so as a consequence, we are sending things like our synthetic turf there. It's very expensive, but out of sight, out of mind. So one of the things, really important things you can do is ask where their fields are going to go and then follow them. We followed it, one of the fields from one of our schools, we actually followed it to the banks of a river that they were trying to restore. And it showed all the tire waste just flowing off all over the place. And that was, they just hired somebody to go repurpose it, and it went to a paintball field, but it was just like all over the place, running off into this river.
Well,
So-
you've really opened our awareness of this issue, and I'm sure that we'll all be following up in different ways. I have recorded this, and I've asked people if they can give me their email. Many of you, I didn't have your email. Some people popped it into the chat. I can follow up by forwarding anything, Kathleen, that you send me, just so that we can make sure everybody gets as many resources as they can. You can email newpaltzclimatesmart@gmail.com. And I can respond to that, or you can pop your email into the chat. Anyone who thinks that they're not already connected, we normally send out, New Paltz Climate Smart sends out a once a month newsletter that has the link to the next meetup, and a lot of times follow up from recent meetups. So I do welcome anybody who wants to add that. And in the interest of time, we normally try to keep to an hour and a half, and we've gone over a bit. So I would again like to thank you, Kathleen, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Megan, for connecting us, and to all of you as participants. I always find that we learn from each other, and each of you had really good questions, and I hope we got to most of the questions. And I would encourage you to follow up with Kathleen post the meeting. All right. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
I very much appreciate it. Have a
Take
good night,
care.
everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing.
Yes.
Good
indeed.
night.
Good night.
Janelle?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah, so I would love, since I missed the early, if there's any chat or at the beginning that I missed, I would love to see the chat.
Okay.
So it might help me answer any other questions that came up.
Sure.
Um,
And what we did live was really just introduction. Everybody introduced themselves.
Oh, that'd be nice too.
Yeah,
to have.
yeah. I will share the recording with you.
Great,
Okay.
great. No, that's great. Well, thank you so much. And
Yes,
I
indeed.
will-
Yeah, you really opened our eyes. I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up that will happen because of this. So thank you.
Great, great.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
All
Okay,
right,
take
good
care.
night.
Good night.
Bye.